Sandy McAuley, an Associate Professor at the Faculty of Education at UPEI, and my topic for research on TAP is Education for Innovation.
And what does that mean?
Well, basically it means that we're living in a world currently and in the future which is going to require more and more innovations, both technologically and socially, if we're going to survive things like climate change, growing globalization, greater contact between very different cultures and so on. And as the institutions in which students, young people get their grounding in what they need to survive, schools should be preparing them to do that.
And how does it do that?
Well, that's the question, because there's no one answer. What there are examples of schools which have demonstrated a capacity to educate for innovation. And usually they involve a variety of things, but usually they will involve such things as a collaboration with the university, a collaboration with groups outside of the classroom, and again, cooperation with the departments of education and so on. So there's a multi-level group working together. What's also key, or what seems to be key, is a focus on students as knowledge creators, as knowledge builders, not as receptacles of knowledge, which is what happens in most classrooms. And if I can illustrate that, this past Christmas I was visiting my nephew over in Nova Scotia, and I was working with his sister who had a science experiment that she got for Christmas, and we were reading this stuff, and it asked about atoms. Now she's 10 and he's 12. She didn't know anything about atoms, so I said to my nephew, "Do you know anything about atoms?" He said, "Well, maybe a little bit. We talked about them a little bit in school last fall." And I said, "Oh, tell me about it. What did you do?" "Well, the teachers sort of talked about it a bit, and then we watched a video, and then we wrote a test." And I said, "Did you pass the test?" "Yes." "What do you remember?" "Not very much." And that's sort of the idea that schools are built on the sense that kids have to know stuff before they can do stuff. And schools that are really focusing on teaching for innovation, students are knowing stuff because they needed to know to solve problems that they have identified and they're working on.
And how does that work?
Well, that can depend on the specific school and the specific project. So maybe if I talked about 3 or 4 examples
Sure.
of stuff that we've seen done. My doctoral work was involved with schools in the far north, and we were working with a group of schools across Canada and around the world on knowledge building. And the idea was that kids at any age could create sophisticated theories, test the theories by finding out the information and designing experiments and so on to solve the problems that they'd identified. We used an online platform prior to the internet, which allowed our students in the north to hook up with students from elsewhere in Canada especially, and work on problems jointly. What was interesting though too is because the kids got to identify their own questions and bring their own perspectives to the problems rather than the teachers, the kids that we were working with who were Inuit got to choose a focus on astronomy, for example, that had a strong Inuit focus, and they were able to interview people from the community about what the stars meant in Inuktitut, collaborating with a school in Hay River, and the students in Hay River were taking a more traditional Western scientific approach. So there was this great cross-fertilization, and the engagement of the students was huge in this project.
Now, are they remembering? Are they remembering what they're learning?
I'm sure that they are. Some of them, I'm not in touch with very many of them anymore, but certainly the difference between what we saw in the level of sophistication of what the students were doing in the classroom was far and above what they would have been doing probably otherwise. So there's one example. An example closer to home here is a graduate student of mine, an MEd student, who was introducing philosophy to grade 2 students as part of their writing program. And she'll be defending her thesis in the next month or so, and what she found was the students' writing improved, their engagement in writing improved, their willingness to collaborate and cooperate with each other improved. So she was creating an environment in which they were learning the kinds of skills that they would need in a collaborative knowledge generation environment. As another example, few years back in 2007, 2008, we did a project here in collaboration with the department, with the school boards, and with Canadian Heritage, the provincial archives. It's called the Living Archives, and students there were researching. They started with the curriculum, the teachers started with the curriculum, but we wanted the students to work at doing real history. So the teachers picked the topics from the curriculum, the students researched those topics, developed their questions around those topics, researched them at the archives, went out into the community, interviewed people in the community about topics related, and they actually built a website called the Living Archives, in which they documented the work they did. So those are all examples of students engaging more deeply in their schoolwork in ways that are meaningful and in ways that are going to carry them differently into the environment post-secondary or wherever they go after school.
Now, is an obstacle to this sort of the attitude of, well, that's not how I did it in school. We learned this, this, and this, and it didn't do us any harm.
It is a huge obstacle. School is one of the most traditional and unbending environments that there is, for partly for the same reason that you described. Everybody's been to school almost, so everybody's an expert on it and knows what it should be. Just have to ask yourself, though, well, the internet didn't take off, it didn't exist meaningfully until 1996. Blogs and the social media that now engage over half the world's, or well, over 1 billion of the world's population, weren't meaningful at all until the early 2000s. The world is changing in a way that I don't think anybody predicted, certainly in the time that I was in school. I can still remember when we bought our first electronic calculator, and they bought 2 for the whole school, and they were $400 and some odd each.
Well, it sounds like a great discussion. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Well, I hope so, and I hope that people bring their perspectives and their thoughts with them.